Thank you so much for the nice welcome. And I think this is actually your last question tees up what I'm going to be talking about
Yeah.
pretty much, because I'm actually going to really focus on a lot of practical deployments and applications across public sector agencies and cities. So I appreciate the warm introduction. And please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. Well, it's great to be here with you all. And, as I've been in this space for many years with Google for the last 3 years, one of the things that I've seen is just there's so much advancement on the technology side in terms of, data and the types of, machine learning, AI, data analytics, all this technology. But the way that I tend to think about this is, let's start with what are the big mission-oriented challenges or problems that you were collectively trying to solve for society? And then how do we empower the agencies to really move faster along that path? And so, when you think about Google, our mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That's our overall mission. And so when we think about our approach to problems, behind the scenes and all the things that we are working on, machine learning is really at the core. And we think about approaching our own products in that way. How do we not just like make incremental improvements, but how do we transform and rethink the way that we do things? So that kind of culture is embedded in the way that we approach our own products. And so when you think about the products that many of us use on the consumer side, whether it's things like, Google Docs and Workspace and Meet and things like that, Smart Assistant, Search, all these things on the back end, we are taking all this complex information, understanding patterns, using AI, interpreting the world around us, but then really serving it up in a way that is easy to consume for the user, right? And I think that's a really important point as we think about, all this great technology is wonderful, but the goal is really to make information useful, to enable people to live their lives in an easier way, improve the way cities function, and make it more accessible to different types of users. And so when we think of those types of things that we've done in our own products, over the last few years, we've really taken a lot of those capabilities and brought them to what we call Google Cloud. And so, in the past, and I'm sure many of you are very, have deep expertise and capabilities to develop machine learning models and things like that. But in general, especially when we go to public sector agencies, those are not skill sets that are easy for them to acquire. They might have some data scientists, data analytics people, but generally those are hard skills for them to acquire. And so our focus is really to take a lot of these capabilities that we've developed over the years into our own products and democratize AI, make it much easier to access those technologies without necessarily needing a data science degree. So if you're a developer or an executive that needs to leverage the technology to make decisions, it just becomes a lot easier and faster to be able to use the technology in a way that is much more accessible. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details on the technology today, but what I am going to do is show you ways to that we've deployed it working with a number of different types of cities, states, private sector entities on real use cases. Before I do that though, I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the business drivers. So as we work with cities and states and counties and different levels of governments, there's a few different themes that continue to come out and emerge in terms of those challenges that they're trying to solve and what some of the barriers are. So the first one is community engagement. And, being able to do this from a number of different perspectives, being able to reach people and meet people where they are in terms of how services get delivered. And we've seen a big transformation happen over the course of the pandemic, just out of necessity, right? Because people haven't been able to physically go to locations to get services. And so there's been a much more important aspect of having a digital front door that enables people to access the services in a way that's easier and more digitally friendly. The other aspect of it is being able to get input from the community and understand what those needs are, so that as decisions are being made about services to deploy, about investments to make, that those kinds of information are gathered from communities, and oftentimes communities that have been left behind. And so being able to have that better way of engaging in that two-way interaction of both providing services, communicating, but then also taking information from the community that helps inform decisions. So that's one area. The second area is insight generation. And we hear this a lot. Most organizations are set up in very siloed ways. And over the course of many years, there's organizational silos, data silos. And so it makes it harder to get to the insight that helps make a decision. And so helping agencies get to that ability to generate an insight from all this data that they have sitting in their organizations in a way that's easier and faster, leverages all this data in a way that can help inform decisions, and even move into predictive analytics is the second area we hear often. The third area is reducing manual work. So there's so many things that are kind of built into the way things are done, whether it's like all the data that has to be wrangled, or whether it's physical inspections where people have to go out and do these types of things. It takes a lot of manual effort, and we know that cities and states, they're getting crunched to do more with less. And so being able to introduce more of that efficiency and take off a lot of those manual tasks, so the staff can really focus on the things that leverage their experience to make decisions, to take an intervention, to take an action. And then the last area is being able to prioritize for impact. So you may see all the kind of the funding that's coming down in the new infrastructure bill. There's all kinds of decisions to make, to look at where do we spend our resources, both from an operational perspective, from a planning perspective, from an investment perspective. And then there's metrics that matter to each organization, whether it's improving safety, improving access to services, mobility, many types of kind of mission-oriented goals that an organization has. And how do you look at, like, where do we really invest our resources to drive and push forward in those areas that really matter to us as an organization? And that takes looking across these data silos and detecting patterns and really taking that data-driven approach. So those are the common things that we are seeing as we work across different agencies. When we come in to work with agencies, we bring, in Google, we talk about the 10x innovation mindset, and really bringing that type of thinking and leveraging AI to do that. And one of the things that we really try to encourage is that as we do this, this is not about like taking, a year to plan, another year to deploy in these long time frames. It's really deploying in days and weeks and taking those steps to iterate. And I think the cost of doing that kind of iteration and deployment has come down a lot because of the technologies that are available. So we really encourage agencies to take that step of, okay, let's start with, here's the problem you're trying to solve. Let's start working on it. Let's do it now. Scope it in a way that makes sense. It doesn't have to be 10x right away. It could be, something smaller than that, but kind of have that mindset of pushing beyond where we are today and doing it in a way that is iterative and deployed in days and weeks. So you learn fast what works and what doesn't work. So now I'll go into some different examples, and I'll start off, a little bit broad, and then I'm going to go and share different examples across a lot of different areas. And so what we found as we work with different agencies, there's different approaches that they want to take. Some of them might say, hey, we really want to take a big, bold approach, like we did with Colorado Department of Transportation, and build an advanced analytics platform across lots of different use cases. And then we have other agencies that say, hey, we really want to focus on a particular problem, a particular set of assets that we have, and focus on that use case and solve that. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these as we go on. And then, there's other examples that are maybe not as much about like a particular mission area, but are about things like cybersecurity. And of course, that's a big topic right now. And being able to use the power of cloud to analyze and understand and protect against those types of attacks. So I'll share with you some different examples. And, as we go into this, one of the first things we do is think, okay, what's the outcome that you are trying to achieve? And then look at what are the different data sources that could be leveraged in order to achieve that outcome. And that can be data that the agency already has, and they often have lots of rich data, as I was talking about earlier. But there might be other new sources of data that are non-traditional that could be leveraged as well. And that could be things like crowdsourced data, like Waze data, for example. It could be search trends data, social media data, videos. So lots of different sources of data. And I'll just give you one example here. This is on the left side, on the state of California during the pandemic. They wanted to understand what are some of the patterns where people might be headed to. And so we worked with them on leveraging search trends data. And these are a couple of beaches in California. And you could see this is last year, over the course of March, very low, search trend activity. And then at the end of April, you see this spike. And that was an early indication that people are going to start going to this place, this beach. These are two different beaches. And then we were able to validate that and triangulate that actually with cell phone data to show that, yes, actually people were going to that location after doing these searches. And so that helps understand transportation activity, people movement activity. So, the agencies can prepare and know what types of actions they might need to take. We also have Waze data, which is a rich source of data with incidents and traffic delay information, and I'm able to leverage that type of data to help agencies understand patterns, do earlier incident detection. But the main point is this, starting with the problem to be solved and then looking at what are the data sources that could be leveraged to help address these use cases. So one of the examples, we've worked with the city of Memphis, and they have on their public buses, they have cameras. And so this is an existing asset. And what they wanted to do is better understand the road surface conditions, are there defects forming in the pavement, potholes that were forming, and they already had these cameras. And so we worked with them to develop some machine learning models to detect and characterize these defects. And then that information from the models could flow right into their existing maintenance systems to help them prioritize and optimize where do they focus their maintenance efforts. Another use case that they were interested in was being able to detect property conditions. So again, using these same types of cameras, they wanted to be able to more sooner detect urban blight. And so being able to understand things like, boarded up windows, graffiti, overgrowth on homes, on residential homes, would help them identify an early, or detect more soon when those conditions were happening, so they could send out people and take care of those neighborhoods so that they didn't have that decline. So this is an example of kind of taking that unstructured data that existed, video feeds, and turning that into something that was usable and actionable. So I mentioned the Colorado Department of Transportation. So we've been working with them, and they're like many transportation agencies where they have over the course of many years developed different systems, and they have different organizations that manage their different functions. And so they really wanted to bring the data together and to be able to generate more insight from that data. And so we worked with them to create an advanced data analytics platform where we could bring in all this data from these different sources and then be able to deploy them across many different use cases, from the folks that are doing their operations and their traffic management to understanding safety, things like secondary crash analysis, maintenance prioritization, performance metrics. And as I mentioned, even taking things that they were already doing today and making those processes faster for things like performance metrics. These are things that they have to do. They generate metrics today. Can we help them make it easier? And so being able to take all this data that they have and generate those metrics and simplify that frees up their staff to be able to work on other things that they need to be working on. And then being able to get more insight out of their data to understand things like where are the kind of the places where these secondary crashes are happening? What are some of the causes? Being able to understand and look at that then helps them know what types of interventions to take. We also work with other companies that have used this technology and built their platforms on top of this technology. And so this is one in the connected vehicle space. Geotab is a company that has a fleet of, I think, over like 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles out. And so they have all this data that's being generated from their vehicles. And we're using Google Cloud Platform, processing all this data and generating then insights about what's happening. So where are there places where there's hazardous driving? Where are there places where there's weather conditions like black ice? So being able to take all this data that's coming from these vehicles and then translate that into conditions that an action can be taken. So the next area I'll talk about is it kind of traverses a couple different areas, on the energy side and then also inspection. So this is an example of, this is an energy company that has wind turbines for renewable energy. And they have a process where they send out drones to take images of these wind turbines to do an inspection and look for defects. And similar to the example we talked about for Memphis, that was on the roads, this is on the wind turbines. And they would have people manually reviewing these images and looking for the different types of defects and characterizing them. So they'd have, more than 30,000 images that would come in, and there'd be, several weeks of manual review of these images to identify the defects. And we actually worked with the staff that do this type of work to have them train the machine learning models to characterize these different types of defects. And these inspections went down, from 2 weeks to 2 days. And we also, provided that ability to upskill the workforce and have them be able to train these types of models. And so you can think about this for many different use cases where there's a need to understand something in the physical world, characterize it, and then take some action on it. This is an example on the energy side, and one that, with our own capabilities within Google. So we have, all these data centers that are powering our own products, plus, our cloud computing. And to drive energy efficiency, we are using AI to be able to understand and optimize the temperature of the data centers to really reduce the CO2 emissions and optimize the cooling that happens in these data centers. And so this is an example of applying it, within our own data centers and using neural networks to be able to continue to enhance and optimize and drive that efficiency to reach our carbon neutral goals. So the next example, shifting gears, is a little bit more about like that coordination that is often required within and between agencies and different stakeholders. So if you think about in cities, there's often a stretch of road that needs to get opened up for different reasons. It could be because there's a road improvement project. It could be because a utility needs to lay conduit, right? All kinds of different reasons. And what we saw working with the city of Chicago and then also with the Seattle Department of Transportation is that there were all these different stakeholders and entities who had to do this type of work, and this wasn't being coordinated. They didn't know when one agency needed to do work versus a utility, and so they were duplicating these efforts. And a month later, after maybe they'd already opened up a certain stretch of road, they're opening it up again, of course causing disruption to the traffic flow, and then also costing a lot for the city. And so we helped create a platform that helped the different stakeholders understand where and when these projects were going to take place. And in an easy, again, that idea of just making it really easy for people to consume the information. So all these different stakeholders, using a visual and map-based approach, bringing that data together, surfacing it up, and then enabling that coordination and collaboration. The second part of this was actually then making an interface for the community so that the communities who were impacted by these road closures would be aware of what was happening and the impact on the traffic flow in their communities. The next example brings in more of the IoT element of it, and this is an example with smart parking. And working with Smart Parking, which is a company that was focused on deploying sensors, and their original focus was really on the hardware and deploying all these sensors. And what they recognized as they started getting into this space is that there's a lot that can be done leveraging the data intelligence to understand patterns and behaviors and be able to manage this from more of this kind of central intelligence and building those types of capabilities. And so their whole business was really built on this ability to scale using cloud technologies and deriving these types of insights to enable smart parking. And again, getting to that point that I talked about earlier, being able to deploy quickly and learn is something that helps both on the public sector and the private sector side. Being able to deploy and get this up and running in 4 months, you're then able to iterate much faster, right? It's not this super long planning process. It's like, okay, let's get this out there. Let's start testing it. Let's look at where do we need to tweak, where do we need to adjust? Are we getting the right insights? It enables that really fast development process. I mentioned earlier about community engagement. One of the areas that we've been working on is being able to help with accessibility and knowing and recognizing that there are many different languages that are spoken, where cities have to not only communicate to the English-speaking population, but all the people that they're serving. And so this is an example where we worked with the city of San Jose and really focused on using machine learning for the translation. And this was for their 311 app, and working with them on developing kind of the right dictionary too of words and phrases that made it relevant to the context of the environment and the city. Because those things vary across different places and cities. And so it's important to get that right in order to make sure that they're connecting to the communities that they are trying to reach. And so, this is one where the focus was on Spanish and Vietnamese and being able to do that translation. And if you think about this, it could be done for websites, for mobile apps, for that type of interaction when, kind of when people are interacting with a chat bot or through a phone service. So it's across lots of different surfaces and means of communication to make sure that you're reaching the audiences and meeting them in a way that is most natural to them, both from a language perspective, but also the way that the communication mechanism as well. And the last example that I'll share is on the topic of climate. We've been doing a lot of work in this area. And, if you think about some of the capabilities that Google has built up over the years, like Google Earth Engine, really being able to take this large scale Earth observation data and then turn that into insights that are useful across a number of different areas. So there's kind of the larger scale natural resource types of needs, but then there's also things that get more down to the built environment and planning for infrastructure. You may be familiar with some of the tools that have been developed, like the Environmental Insights Explorer and Project Sunroof, that look at what's the sun exposure across rooftops to be able to determine solar potential, for example. What we've been working on more recently is taking these types of climate data, things like flood forecasting, erosion, drought, wildfire prediction, many of these types of things that are being experienced across cities and states in ways that they haven't experienced before. These things are happening more often. And so taking those models and then being able to translate that into how does it affect the built environment? How does it affect the road network? What am I going to need to do, to manage my infrastructure? So we're taking those types of models and now bringing them down in a way that can help enable more operational and planning decisions for cities and states. And with that, I will just come back to my point of, these are all things that are deployed, that are out there already. And so I think sometimes we think about like this future of, smart cities. And I think my message is really, it's not like this future world we have to think about. It's how do we actually leverage a lot of the capabilities that already exist today and move those further, right? Like what can we deploy right now that's already ready? And there's so much of that that exists that my message is let's start tackling these things and deploying rather than waiting for a future state. And that applies across so many different areas, from transportation to community engagement to health, public health, social services, all these things. And what we've seen is that in the pandemic, a lot of that just happened out of necessity because there was a need to deploy services quickly. And so we almost shrunk down like a decade's worth of digital transformation into weeks, days, months, because it had to happen. So when there's that kind of burning platform, we can do it and we can make these things happen. And so I think we can take some of that spirit of how things happened, take the good out of these kind of situations where, in the pandemic, where we can learn from some of these environments and look at, okay, like what are the things that we could do now to really advance the state of how cities and states operate. And with that, I will pause here and see if there are questions.
Thank you, Monali, for your excellent presentation. I think the use cases were excellent. I mean, I was actually looking for real world deployment of the solutions, which I asked my previous speaker, and you actually explained it very well. One of the problems that you mentioned, like when you worked with the city of San Jose, I also worked with the city of San Jose on a related project where it was a smart emergency alert systems. And the problem we also encountered is multilingual, multi-platform support, and not only for different devices, because when there is an emergency, the community, the citizens must be notified within a certain time frame. Right now, the problem is it takes longer than 10 minutes to reach out the populations, because some of them are using smartphones, some of them are using tablets, some of them are just don't even have a smartphone, they are using televisions. So reaching to these kind of diverse populations with multiple languages was a big problem for the city. And we are a team from our university. We work on a project and we know what the challenges are. So my question to you is, can you explain me some of the challenges that you faced with working with the city? Because some of the things, it takes longer than expected to get deployed.
Yeah, I think, sometimes the challenge is that, like a project can start like this that we worked on. It starts in one area, but really it could be deployed, the same underlying technology, right? Like the translation technology that was built, and the glossaries and all those things that were created, that could be used across so many different areas, right? But it takes some time, I think, sometimes to figure out, because of the point that I was talking about earlier. Often the way things have kind of been built up over the years, there's all these different systems, right? And so across the city, there may be several different, platforms and systems and things that are used. So, the challenge is how do you, once something is built and is working, then how do you get that embedded in the other systems, or what's the way to kind of proliferate that so that the different types of services that need this kind of, translation can leverage what already exists, right? Rather than kind of trying to figure out how to do it again, somewhere else. And I think that happens often I think in any large organization. It's not just cities or states or public sector, right? It's like that awareness. And so I think we're working on that too, is increasing the collaboration and awareness of different stakeholders and entities across the agencies so they can leverage what's already there too.
Yes, I think there are a lot of silos between different departments, number one. And that the other thing is sometimes you need to upgrade their hardware or some of their infrastructure, which may be 20, 30 years old, and they may not be ready for those kind of upgrades that are necessary to implement these solutions. And the other challenges that I think I have faced, and also some of my colleagues have faced, is about the data. Like when you are working with the city, like who owns the data, how the data will be, are they comfortable sharing the data of the citizens to a private company? How do you deal with this kind of situation?
Sure. Yeah. So when we work with a city, or a state or any agency, we're setting up their environment. So it's all of their data and only they have access to it. So it's not like, they're sharing their data with Google. It's their data. It's in a secure environment. They can provide access to whoever they want, within their set of stakeholders, and there's ways to control levels of access. So it's really done in a way that is, secure from their user base and their stakeholders. And so it's up to them what kind of access they want to do. Yeah. So, and we find this is a very common issue, that they have a hard time within their own organizations sharing data. I hear this all the time, where it's hard for them to be able to share data with another department, within the agency or a different team. And so they want a place that all that data can be available and consolidated and accessible and cleaned and, all of those types of things, and then provide different levels of access based on the different teams. And then, it could be also that they want to share some, with the university or somebody else that they're working with. And so being able to have that centralized place where they can host all the data and then manage permissions is something that we hear a lot. And that takes, it does take a little bit of time in general to make those types of transitions. So in general, like to your earlier point, generally we're not saying rip and replace everything you already have. Like, that's not the approach that makes sense. It's really more like, okay, where can we augment, and where can we help you in places where you want to be able to deploy something faster. So that's generally the way that we approach it, is not like take everything out and start from scratch. It's because that's not very realistic and nobody wants to do that really. It's more like, where can we augment and help you bring together relevant data sets, get to some insights that will help you achieve some of your goals, and then continue to build on that. You don't need to, kind of take some approach that is really disruptive. Just start and get some successes. And I think that that often helps when they can see that, okay, I moved some of these things over. And now we've seen that with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet too, where they moved their data from, kind of all these silos that they had on-prem and moved them into this cloud environment. And it was amazing to see how quickly they were able to start doing lots of different analytics use cases around weather, around work zones, so many things. The speed at which they were able to generate new insights on their own, they were doing this, was just rapidly decreased. I mean, they were able to do this, and before it was just much harder for them because there's so many different teams they had to go to assemble the data, and and then even trying the different tools that they had to use. It was just a much kind of heavier process.
Thank you. If you have any questions from the audience, we have a few more minutes left. Please feel free to ask questions.